Okay, guys, can we start the session? Am I audible to all of you? Yes, okay. Okay. All right, guys. So we have done with Parson, critical analysis part completed. And then today we will be discussing about Merton. Let me complete Merton and then I'll discuss the question paper. So today and tomorrow we will, in 2 days, we'll complete Merton so that we will complete the thinkers and then we will see how it went. Okay. So that will be better for you to understand. So let's start with Merton. Now, before that, if you remember, I have told you Merton is considered as the father of neo-functionalism. Then what does that mean? Neo-functionalism means it is going to be a kind of modified functionalism. So Merton is also a functionalist, but his functional approach will be slightly different than the functional approach we have seen so far. But now, guys, if you ask me so far who are the functionalists, you know mainly about Durkheim and Parson. We have discussed that in your, thinkers chapter. But if you see, we have discussed quite, a bit in the initial sessions about Auguste Comte, right, related to the functional approach, the positivist approach, and his functionalism is based on consensus. So we started off with Auguste Comte, then briefly we discussed about Herbert Spencer, right, and then Emile Durkheim, and then Talcott Parson. And then you will also see they're not purely sociologists, right? Malinowski, Redcliffe Brown, they are also functionalists. And there is nothing to discuss in that in your syllabus. That is the reason why we skip these thinkers, Malinowski, Redcliffe Brown, etc. But if you're preparing for some state exams, BPSC or something like that, you might see these names as well in the syllabus. Okay, but we skip that because it is not part of our syllabus. So this is what we have seen so far, functionalism. Right, Auguste Comte based on consensus. Then Herbert Spencer, he introduced a structural functionalism. Structural functionalism means functional for a particular structure. So normally when we talk about functionalism, what does that mean? It is functional. We explain everything in terms of function. So what is the difference between structural functionalism and functionalism? If you ask me, just take it into a context. That's the difference. For example, if I talk about caste system, I can say the functions of caste. And it should be by using a structural functional perspective. And that's the reason why when we discuss about functional perspective in paper 2, you're going to see that M. N. Srinivas using a structural functional perspective because the context is very important. The structure, that in which structure it is applicable, in which structure it is functional, that need to be very clear. You see, caste is not heard of, if you see US society and European society and all, you cannot simply talk about caste as functional, right? So this cannot be explained as universally functional. So it has to be functional. If it is functional, it has to be functional on a particular structure. Like in Indian context, it may be functional. So that we have seen that. And then we have discussed about Emile Durkheim is also a structural functionalist. Parson also a structural functionalist, right? And Emile Durkheim, we discussed about certain concepts like separation of cause and function. I hope all of you remember all those things. I'm just going for a recap because these are the functionalists that you know. And here we are going to talk about Merton, and there is something new is going to come within functionalism that you know. Okay, so Durkheim talk about functionalism. He separated cause and function. Why? To avoid illegitimate teleology. Right, separation of cause and function is one of the most important pillars of Durkheim's method. He used scientific methods and everything. We have demonstrated in various theories as well. Parson went for grand theory, dealt with abstractions, and that was very complicated. But Parson never used any specific methods in the theorization. Right, forget about Malinowski and Redcliffe Brown. I'll just mention about them when we discuss in the PDF. They are talking about psychological functionalism, the individual functionalism, etc. That's not important for us when it comes to UPSC. Okay, they will not be asking you questions from Malinowski and Redcliffe Brown. But Malinowski, I'll be mentioning about Malinowski when it comes to some chapters like religion, I'll discuss, family, I will discuss. We will just make a reference to these thinkers, but not in depth we are going to study as it is not part of our syllabus. Okay, so what Merton is going to do is he'll try to understand the problems of functionalism so far. Now, what is the problem so far? If you see most of the functionalists, just because they are functionalists, they will always try to be functional. You see something, they will always explain that in functional terms, whether it is crime or suicide, inequality, everything. So the idea is, if something is existing, it is necessarily fulfilling some vital functions for society. That's why it is existing. That's all about functionalism so far. I have explained these terms in this way in the chapter of stratification, if you remember. Exactly the same language is what we have used also. How we explain that? Functionalism means you're trying to identify things in functional terms. How? Because it is existing means it has to fulfill certain vital functions for society. So what are the keywords here? It is fulfilling. That is one keyword. Some vital functions for society and is inevitable. It is considered inevitable. Sometimes it is considered inevitable. Inequality is something which is considered inevitable, right? Because inequality has to be there. Everybody cannot be rich and everybody cannot be poor. If so, society cannot function. And we have seen in which all theories, Talcott-Parsons theory, Davis and Moore theory, and also Warner theory, right? All these we have discussed in stratification. Same way, crime is functional, we discussed in Durkheim. Suicide is functional, we discussed in Durkheim. So all these things have been identified in functional terms. So this is actually one of the problem also. This is, you can even consider it as functional bias. To some extent, it's okay. But if you try to justify everything, it is going to be a kind of functional bias. So functional bias is one of the criticism. They'll always try to identify one or the other function in anything. Okay, so this is one of the problems. Secondly, ignorance of conflict, or you can first and second, you can consider it together. You ignore the conflict aspect or the dysfunctions. So what Merton is going to do is he will solve this problem. He will bring in dysfunction also in his approach. So one of the most important modification that Merton make in his functional approaches is not only about functions. His functional approach is also talking about dysfunction of a particular phenomena. You got my point? So dysfunction at different levels he discussed. All those things I'll discuss in detail later. So as of now, the first point that you need to understand is in his functional approach, he also bring in dysfunction. Now, before also we discussed about a kind of dysfunction when it comes to Durkheim, but that was a temporary abnormal form. When we discussed about the pathological form, he discussed about a temporary abnormality and he discussed about the solution also. Even in Parson also, to an extent, I've talked about dysfunction when it comes to a disturbance. When there is the cultural system is there, energy flows there, information flows there. If there is a break in the flow, then there may be some disturbance. That time there may be some dysfunction. But that also will be solved through the specific mechanisms. But Merton exclusively talk about dysfunction of a particular social item. So for them, dysfunction is temporary and not even given 1% attention, right? But here, when it comes to Merton, equal importance of function is given to dysfunction also. So this is one of the most important reasons why his approach is called as neo-functionalism. But there are a lot of modifications. I'm just bringing about the first and most important point because functionalism is known after function. So I have just brought in dysfunction. So that is a key point. That's the most important point. I hope this is very clear. So in Merton's approach, you will see dysfunction also. So in functionalism, till now, if you see only functions, so that is what functional bias. They will always try to identify the function. If something is existing, it is necessarily fulfilling vital functions for society. That's how they take it. But that's not the case for Merton. It can have a disintegrating influence also. Inequality can have a disintegrating influence. Crime can have a disintegrating influence. Suicide can have a disintegrating influence. Even family can have a disintegrating influence. Religion can have a disintegrating influence. Not all these are functional all the time. Okay, so you need to also identify the disintegrating influence in terms of dysfunctions of that particular social item. Guys, I'm using some technical language now because you are at this level where you can actually understand, right? That is the reason why I'm using this. I've changed my language now. You can understand also. Okay, so the first point is clear. Then you can also say one of the criticism is illegitimate teleology. Except Durkheim, that is one of the common criticism in functionalism, right? Cause and function as the same. That is also one of the problem. Lack of use of methods is a problem. But except Durkheim solved these two problems. But in all the other functionalists, especially when it comes to Parson, he have never used any method. He just went for abstract theorization. And we have seen that theory yesterday, right? So these are few criticisms that Merton have observed, and he wanted to solve this. And what he did is he come up with his own postulates. Very important. This is going to be a 10 marker, or even they can ask you as a 20 marker. Merton's postulates. In fact, this year there was a question from Merton, but not this one. It is anomy, deviance. That is what we are going to discuss tomorrow, which is very simple. So here we are going to discuss about the modifications that Merton is doing. First modification is in terms of Merton's postulates. What are they? There are three postulates: postulate of functional unity, postulate of functional indispensability, postulate of universal functionalism. I'll just write it and then I'll explain each one of this. Okay. So if someone want to write the modifications which has been done by Merton, what you need to do is, first, your approach. I'm just talking about your approach. First, you talk about what was functionalism so far. I hope that is clear. You talk about Auguste Comte, you talk about Herbert Spencer, you talk about Durkheim, you talk about Parson, you can talk about Malinowski, you can talk about Radcliffe Brown, their approaches as well. Auguste Comte based on consensus, Herbert Spencer structural functionalism, Durkheim causal functional analysis, Parson abstract theorization, Malinowski individual functionalism. Like that you can mention if there is time and space, and then talk about the drawback in terms of criticism, and then talk about modifications. Now here I'm going to talk about modification because that's what actually going to be discussed in the paper. But before that, you need to mention about this. First part is clear. Now modification, the first is the postulates. He identified the critiques or the drawbacks and he provided solution in terms of postulates. There are three postulates: postulate of functional unity, okay, and then postulate of functional indispensability, okay, and then the third is postulate of universal functionalism. I'll explain each one of this. I will also talk about the other concepts that he have introduced. Okay, let me complete this one first anyway. So the first one we will take, postulate of functional unity. Guys, it means the approach so far, like Durkheim and all, their approach is, in a system, whatever is existing, it is necessarily, like different parts are there. So all these parts have an integrating role. It is necessarily fulfilling some vital functions, and that is the reason why the system is surviving. Okay, so all are positively contributing towards the system. So the key point here is all parts or the constituents, you can use any word, it doesn't matter, all the constituents of a system is positively contributing for the system, for the integration or working or whatever it is. But what Merton says is, he will say it is not necessary that all parts are positively contributing. There can be some disintegrating influence also. You have to identify that disintegrating influence in terms of dysfunction. So he starts with that one in the first. Postulate of functional unity. Not all are, all constituents are ensuring unity of the system. There can be some disintegrating influence. Identify that in terms of dysfunction. Second is postulate of functional indispensability. Guys, indispensability means it's a kind of inevitability. Some of the thinkers consider there are certain social institutions which are inevitable because the function which is provided by that institution can be provided by only that institution. For example, if you talk about family, the functions which is provided by family can only be provided by family. This is what the approach, like whether it is emotional security or sexual gratification or economic security or taking care of child or taking care of aged, it could be provided only by family. This is the approach of functionalists so far. But what Merton says is, he introduced a new concept here. He says, it is not only that institution. You need to think of alternative. There can be alternative beyond family. For example, taking care of child, there can be child care centers. Taking care of aged, old age homes are there, right? So he introduced another term here, that is identifying alternatives, the functional alternative. Functional alternative means the same function which is provided by family can also be provided by some other institution. Identify that. So we have now discussed about two new concepts. One is dysfunction, the other is functional alternative. Okay, now third one is related to universal functionalism. So the approach so far is everything, something existing is universally functional, right? So what Merton says is, it is not necessarily. We already discussed about dysfunction. Now he's also talking about there is something called as non-function. There may not be any function as well, but still something will exist. So what you need to do is identify the net balance. So this is what the new concepts, more are coming. At least now we have discussed about dysfunction, alternative, non-function, net balance. Guys, I'll give you an example. Let's say this class itself, if you take, okay, all of the students and the teacher you consider as the parts or the constituents. That's the best way to explain. So first approach is all the constituents are positively contributing to the unity of the class. But what Merton says is there may be some disintegrating influence. Some students may come, turn on the mic and will create some disintegrating influence. That will be a dysfunction for the class. You got it? So that is the first point. Second one, if you see, alternative. Now, alternative, I hope you understood that. So dysfunction, and then non-function means what? There may be some students who are sitting here. They are, see, this is a dysfunction, right? Some creating disturbance. What is function? There may be some students who will positively contribute to what the teachers are discussing. So that will be, with that more additions will come, more content will come, that will enrich the knowledge. That is definitely positively contributing to the unity of the system. So we discussed about function as well as dysfunction. Third possibility is non-function. Some students will come, just sit in the class. It doesn't matter for them what the teacher talk, what the others talk. There is no contribution. They listen, they just go after the class. That's it. Right? That is non-function. So these are the three key words you need to know. Dysfunction, non-function, and then net balance. What is net balance? So if you need to study something, family, you have to identify the functions. You have to identify the dysfunctions and in which context these are non-functional, and then attach certain weights to the functions and non-dysfunctions. And finally, add the positives and negatives and you see what is the result. If it is positive, then it is functional. So that is what you mean by net balance. Identify the net balance. Altogether, whether it is functional or not, if you need to tell that, get all the functions, get all the dysfunctions, take the net balance. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, this much functions are there, this much dysfunctions are there. What do you need to do? Take the sigma of functions and take the sigma of dysfunction and take the net balance. If the difference is positive, it is positive. That means functional. If the difference is negative, it is negative. Okay, so we have discussed about the three postulates. Now, okay, so postulates is done, right? Now the next question they can ask you is this concepts, new concepts. So already we discussed about few concepts. What are they? Dysfunction, we have not seen so far in functionalism. We have also discussed about non-function. We have not yet discussed this in the previous cases. And then we have discussed about net balance. The previous functionalists never discussed about net balance, identifying function, dysfunction, giving the weightage and taking net balance. No, we have never discussed about alternatives. So these four are new concepts which has been given by Merton. Now beyond this, he also talked about something called as manifest and latent function. Guys, manifest, function, and latent, understand it very carefully. It can be again a separate question. But along with this also, you need to write this because there is a concept which is given by Merton again. Latency we discussed in AGIL model. There I've told you hidden aspect. Here also it is the same meaning. Manifest function means direct function. Okay. Latent function means hidden function. Or when I do certain action, when I teach you, this is an action. There is a manifest function. What is that? You will score good in sociology. That is why you are here and that is why I'm taking class. So you are scoring good in sociology. That is the direct function. That is a manifest function. That is the intended outcome. That is what actor intend, right? So manifest means intended outcome of the actor. Okay, and that's why you are here, right? Latent means unintended, but it is function. That is a hidden function. For example, like once you have done with sociology, you will definitely improve in your essay, in your interview, even in your common sense, right? The attitude and everything will change. And when, for example, even if you become an IAS IPS officer, you'll be more sensitive to society and social problems than a student who come with a math background or a physics background. So that is a latent function. Latent function or unintended function. This is not the intended one. When I take class, when you attend this class, when I take class, what is the intended outcome? Scoring good in sociology. That is what manifest. When you attend this class, that is the action you are doing. What is the meaning attached by the actor? That is what intended. You need to score good in sociology. But you never thought of this, right? After becoming an IAS officer, I'll be more sensitive to society, and that's why I'm taking sociology. No, never. That is unintended. In another way, I can also tell that this is individual function. There's a function for the person who's doing, because that is what intended. And this is societal function. And from the point of view of methodology, now I'm going to next level. You also need to follow me. From the point of view of methodology, this is having a micro element and this is having a macro element. So Merton also bringing both micro and macro in terms of manifest and latent. Manifest is direct, intended. Now listen this word very carefully. Actors' intended meaning. Who's talking about this? Understanding and studying actors' intended meaning and establish cause and effect relation. Who is that? Weber. So that is why micro. Okay. Or I can also say, when I talk about manifest function, it is having an element of non-positivism because you are trying to identify individual meanings. Here, there is an element of positivism. So I've connected so much of things now. I hope you're following me. If not, everything is given in the PDF. While reading, you have to understand. And if you're not able to connect like this, there is no point in writing this answer. I've seen people will only talk about intended, unintended, direct, indirect, and all. But so much of things are connected now, right? So intended, that means you want this to happen. That's why you're attending the session. That means it is individual function. This is a function for you. And that means it is a micro. And perspective from the point of view of methodology, it is non-positivism. It is also called as subjective predisposition. Okay, manifest one. Subjective predisposition. Latent, objective, manifestation. Easy to remember because why it is subjective? Non-positivism. Here positivism, so objective manifestation. How it is objectively manifested in society. You are going to serve good in society. Okay, now guys, normally you will see it as intended and unintended outcome. Now, when I say outcome are of two types. It can be function, it can be dysfunction. There was a question previous year, unintended outcome and latent function. Okay, so both unintended and latent are same. So people will be confused. But outcome means function and dysfunction. So when I talk about unintended outcome, here latent function and latent dysfunction will come. And they have asked about this and they have asked about this. So the second one is actually the subset of the first one. Okay, now same way you need to explain dysfunction also. There can be, for any act, you're committing a crime, there is a dysfunction. So actor doing something, a crime, there is a dysfunction, manifest dysfunction will be there. That is the meaning attached by the actor or the intended outcome. You're killing someone or you're stealing something. There is a intended outcome, that is manifest dysfunction. Then what is a latent dysfunction, which he don't want to, he's not intending, but there is a problem for society, right? So the law and order will be affected or whatever it is, that is going to be a crime against society, so that society will be affected. That is unintended outcome, unintended dysfunction. So now if you see for any action, even if you talk about corruption, you can think about this. You can think about this. Corruption Okay. There can be something. Now, I'll talk about outcome. Intended, outcome, unintended, outcome. Or I can talk about function and dysfunction. Okay, or leave it. I can talk about function and dysfunction. Within function, I can have manifest function, latent function. Means corruption, manifest function. For whom? Those people who are engaged in that. Latent function, things will get faster and all those things, right? So there is function. And then you need to think about this, right? There are dysfunction. For whom? For others, for society. So just think about this. Manifest function and then manifest dysfunction and then latent dysfunction. So for any act, for a crime, for a corruption, for suicide, there is function, right? Suicide is functional. Durkheim explained in terms of function, manifest and latent. There is dysfunction also, manifest and latent. So what you need to do when you're studying something, identify all the four. Manifest function, latent function. Manifest dysfunction, latent dysfunction. Okay. Now, if you get a question on manifest and latent function, what all things you will write? These things need to be written properly in paragraph. I have given it. You just need to write that. Just 1 minute, guys. ക്ലാസ്സിലാണ് അയ്യോ അപ്പൊ വീട്ടിലാരുമില്ലേ? ഞാൻ അവിടെ കൂൾ ബ്ലൂം ഇതൊക്കെ വാങ്ങിച്ചോണ്ട് കൊടുത്തിട്ടുണ്ടല്ലോ മോക്ക്. പ്ലേഡോ കിട്ടിയോ? കിട്ടിയില്ലേ? Okay, so I hope this is clear, guys. Now, one more important question that they can ask you is Merton's paradigm. What is Merton's paradigm is, he have given a step-by-step procedure. You follow that, you will be able to make a sociological study properly, which capture everything, function, dysfunction, and everything will be captured. So what he says is, I'll discuss step by step. There are 9 steps. It is very easy to remember. If they ask you, just cut, copy, paste the same. Very easy to remember. So Merton's functional paradigm. So 3 things that we have discussed is Merton's postulates. 3 postulates we discussed. New concepts we discussed about dysfunction, non-function, net balance, alternative, manifest latent function, manifest latent dysfunction, right? And there is something called as middle range theory also. Middle range theory means don't take 2 elementary items to study. Don't take 2 abstractions also like Parson did. Take a middle range and study. The advantage is if you take middle range, it is very easy to study. It is very easy to check. It is very easy to ensure objectivity. Testability is possible. Reliability is possible. That is why he preferred middle range phenomena. So in the paradigm, now this is going to be a very important question. I hope you're following me. I will go with the PDF also. The same things will be repeated. If you have any confusion, just listen to me and try to understand it now. Okay. Paradigm. First step is you select a standardized item. Guys, standardized item means take a standard phenomena. There can be some, many things will be there if you look into society, but we can't take each and everything and study. Take a standard phenomenon, like religion is a standard phenomena. Family is a standard phenomena. Marriage is a standard phenomena, right? These are also middle range items. So take a standardized item, which should be of middle range. Don't take like what Parson did, too abstraction. Don't do that. Take a standardized item. That means something which is common to all, something which is known to all, and it should be of middle range. Second is, that is very important, you have to specify the context in which you're studying. I have given you this example of caste system before. If you're just studying without specifying that it is in Indian context, then what is the point of doing that? So context is very important. Then what he says is, let's say you have selected social action or religion, and then specify the context. And then what you need to do is, whatever studies so far conducted, you have to collect it, you have to read it, you have to understand it, you have to summarize it, and then give a detailed description of that. And then upon that, you need to develop on it. Like you see Parson, how he improved our Weber. He went to Weber's place, he met with his wife, and then collected data and everything. So this approach is what is called as post factum analysis. What do you need to do? All the data so far, all the studies have been done, collect it, analyze it. So this is very simple, right? Take a middle range item, specify the context, go for post factum analysis. Now what you need to do is identify the manifest function. Easy, right? And then what you need to do is identify the latent function. So this is talking about functions. And then what you need to do? Function I have identified. Now what I need to do? I need to talk about manifest, dysfunction, and then I need to talk about latent dysfunction. So here I'm talking about dysfunction. So I identified the functions, manifest and latent. I identified the dysfunction, manifest and latent. Now, after identifying functions and everything, I also need to provide the alternatives for which can provide the same function. After giving all, you got the functions, you got the dysfunctions, give some weightage to functions and dysfunction, and then come up with a conclusion of the net balance. And this net balance, if it is positive, this item you have selected altogether is functional. If it is negative, it is going to be dysfunctional. Now the question is, what is the weightage that you can give? It is left out to the investigator. So that is a criticism. If you are a functionalist, you can give more weightage to functions and less weightage to dysfunction. Let's say I have identified 3 functions. Okay, so I have identified 3 functions, and I have identified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dysfunction. But I'm giving weightage 2 for functions and weightage 1 for dysfunction. So what will happen? I get a score when I take the summation here. I get a score 6 for function and I get a score 5 for dysfunction. So 6 is obviously greater than 5, so the difference is positive. Though I have only 3 positives and I have 5 negatives, 3 functions and 5 dysfunctions, but because of the bias of the investigator, this is going to be functional. Where the problem came? Guys, where the problem came here? When I assign the weightage. That is totally left out to the investigator. That is the most important criticism. So whatever I have discussed so far, I hope you understood. Let's go with the okay. Guys, I'm not reading the introductory part, that you just need to complete it. Here, okay, functionalism as a perspective is highly influenced by biological theories of evolution. The social reality is understood as constituting of elements, providing one or the other functions in the context of that reality. And then we discussed about Auguste Comte in terms of consensus. He understands everything in terms of consensus. And then Herbert Spencer in terms of structural functionalism. Durkheim, we spent around 5 days on Durkheim, and we discussed about what is his theories, division of labor, religion, all these theories we have discussed, and how he separated cause and function, and how he used scientific methods and everything, right? And then Redcliffe Brown, just write this. You don't want to discuss in detail as it is not there in your syllabus. Necessary condition of existence. And then Malinowski, theory of needs, that is individual functionalism. It is actually anthropological functionalism. And then what Parson did also, we know that he gave a grand theory and he took functionalism to its logical conclusion. So by this AGIL model, he took functional theorization to its logical conclusion by developing abstract grand functional theories in the form of requisite functionalism or analytical functionalism based on AGIL model. So the criticisms: ignorance of conflict, illegitimate teleology. This one is there everyone with everyone except Durkheim, right? Identifying function and function, always trying to find function. Practical applicability is a big problem. Even Durkheim theory also, we said it is practically not applicable. Functional methods are not there. Maybe Durkheim it is there, but not others. So what he did, he summarized things into 3 postulates, popularly known as Merton's postulates, modified the functional approach by introducing new concepts, and formulated the paradigm. So these are the 3 things that we have discussed now. So this is going to be a question number 1 for you, Merton's postulates. Now, how he modified functional approach, what are the new concepts which has been introduced, that is going to be your question 2. And the paradigm, that is going to be your question 3. Guys, we have answered everything very clearly. Postulates, what are they? Postulate of functional unity, postulate of functional indispensability, postulate of universal functionalism. New concepts. Here itself, he is introducing dysfunction, non-function, net balance, alternative, plus manifest latent function, manifest latent dysfunction, middle range theory. Paradigm, identify a standardized item, context, post factum analysis, manifest function, manifest dysfunction, latent dysfunction, alternative, net balance. That's it. Over. 3 questions. Very simple. Right? Now, do you want me to read this? So here, functional unity, he's talking about, according to this, a social reality has to be viewed as a system, and the constituents ensure the, guys, it is there. You can see here, these are the 3 postulates. And then here we are talking about net balance. And then here I'm talking about manifest in latent function. Everything that I've mentioned comes under this heading, that individual functionalism, societal function, micro, macro, Weber, Durkheim, intended, unintended, everything I've mentioned here in detail. And then paradigm. These are the 9 steps that we have discussed, and also middle range theory. So this is what we need to discuss now. So let's quickly do that. Postulate of functional unity. So according to this, social reality has to be viewed as a system, and the constituents ensure the unity of the system. So Durkheim's approach is the same way, but Merton argued that there can be, it is not necessary that whatever is existing is providing function. He proposed a study of dysfunction for identifying the disintegrating influence. At some point of time, there can be some items which can have a disintegrating influence. Indispensability also we have discussed in terms of alternatives. So what they are saying, functional, just cut, copy, paste this. Nothing more you need to do, guys. Okay, very well prepared answer. Functional indispensability has been understood in terms of indispensability of certain function and social institution. Idea of indispensability is most common in the writing of Malinowski. Merton modified his postulate by introducing the concept of alternatives. You can simply write alternative. You can talk about functional alternative, no problem.